Hello to everyone. Hello to all of the people in the audience. Um, and welcome to our webinar about why rebrands fail. We have a very good, I guess, audience here with us today. Maybe some people who have been through unsuccessful rebrands in the past. Maybe they are planning on doing what we can hope is a successful rebrand in the future. And we have some heavy hitters from the market with us as well. My name is Espen. I'm the chief branding officer in Papirfly and the founder of BrandPad. And with me, I have two great guys with a lot of insights, a lot of experience, a lot of stories, I hope, on the subject of rebranding in general. I guess we agreed, guys, that instead of me introducing you, it's easier if you introduce yourself. Martin, maybe you can go first.
Yeah, of course, Espen. Yeah. My name is Maarten Everton. I'm one of the managing partners of VIM Group. And VIM Group focuses on helping companies go through a rebrand. So from the beginning of scoping out a rebrand, what are the rebranding costs, what are the timelines, what do we need to change in terms of material, and what is also the ambition level in terms of the quality of the carriers. So we're more on the business side of branding. So we're not a design agency, but we help mainly with the project management and the specialist expertise. And on top of that, we also help clients a lot with employing technology and how to actually scale the marketing and brand operations after a rebrand and during the rebrand itself. That's it for me. Blake, maybe you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks. Hey, everyone. Excited to be here. My name is Blake Howard, creative director and co-founder of Matchstic. We are a branding firm that helps organizations move more towards a radically relevant brand. So we're kind of on the creative side of helping organizations think about a new brand launch, or maybe a brand refresh, or maybe a brand transformation. So we work with a lot of organizations in terms of industry or size. Sometimes it's startups, but most likely it's some sort of a legacy or enterprise level organization looking to invest significantly in some sort of a change, or maybe just to create a better brand system. So my background is in design, and I've dabbled in everything related to brand identity, strategy, naming, messaging, and I consider myself a generalist within the specialty of branding. And I also host a podcast called A Change of Brand,
which I love, by the way. I'm a big fan personally. Can you guys tell us quickly about the type of customers you typically work with? Like, if you can't mention names, at least like the size of them and the type of project that is done. Martin, I don't know. Typically, you guys work with enterprise companies. Is that correct?
Yeah, correctly. Yeah, it's enterprise, corporate organizations, global, mainly in EMEA, but also outside of EMEA. We've done rebrands in the US. For us, it's mainly where there's that level of complexity. That's where we thrive, where we can actually help out and iron out the kinks of the rebrand.
Yeah, I guess the bigger the company, the bigger the project, the bigger the potential challenge as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And for you, Blake, from I'm assuming mostly US companies being located in Atlanta.
Yeah, mostly US, some international, but mostly US. Some of the larger organizations would be Publix or UPS, a lot of large nonprofits like Boys and Girls Clubs of America. Human Rights First is a larger NGO that we've worked with. So all over, mostly focused in the US, but all over the US, but then some outside as well.
Yep, great. Okay, thank you. So before we start and kind of jump into the topics here, I wanna say to the audience that feel free to shoot over questions and questions on topics that you want us to cover continuously as we talk even. This will probably not be a super structured conversation. We kind of go a little bit with the flow here and see kind of where the questions fit in. So we're happy to take questions at any time, given that they're relevant. So go ahead and do that. Before we start here, let's talk about defining kind of the category a little bit. We hear a lot about brands doing rebranding. We hear about brands doing brand refreshes. Some brands are doing smaller adjustments here and there. You want to tell us a little bit about how you feel like this is different, or how these different things differ, Martin?
Yeah, you mean the typical sizes of a rebrand and how you go about the revolutionary part of rebranding versus a more evolutionary path.
Yeah, how is this different, and how is a
Yeah.
project different based on that?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on the strategy, of course, of the rebrand as well. You know, what's behind the strategic driver to go through a rebrand. In a lot of cases, if it's that a brand needs to gain more market share, or there's a new owner, or a new structure, new positioning, when that's completely different from the older positioning, then of course it makes more sense to go through a revolutionary type of rebranding. So they would really change.
A big reveal, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, you would almost touch up on everything, right? Basically, from typography to the design of the logo, the elements used, the communication style, etc. The voice, tone of voice, but also the tone of visual. Everything could change more radically. Whereas if you are, more or less in the same position, but you want to make sure the brand keeps up to date and keeps refreshed with the new market changes or slight course that you want to change strategically, then it makes more sense to do it evolutionary. And there you would do small incremental changes, maybe just adapting the color palette a little bit, or adding a new typography style to it, new colors, new photography, but keeping the core elements recognizable to the public. So building onto the actual the brand value that you've already built up and maintaining that, and not alienating your audience from the brand. So yeah, it depends a bit on the strategy behind it, but
the reason, I guess. Yeah.
Common differences. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we see more and more of these like continuous improvements of a brand, these like smaller adjustments here and there, where brands are moving a little bit towards almost like product development, where instead of having like a big splash, a big deployment once every period, you do smaller things now and then. Instead, we actually have a customer who they do brand changes or kind of small brand refreshes on a weekly basis, meaning they roll out small brand changes like they would roll out marketing campaigns or product deployments, which is quite interesting. It wasn't like this like 10 years ago. Good. Well, we also have to talk about kind of success and failure. So if our rebrand is failing, it means that we measure the effect of it somehow. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this, Blake, in terms of like what is a success or what is a failure when it comes to a rebrand?
Yeah. I think I thought it was interesting that you titled the webinar "Why Do Rebrands Fail?" instead of "Why Do They Succeed?" I do think it's easier.
Do most fail?
Well, I think it's easier to talk about the failures sometimes. Like it's easier to point out what went wrong. And I do think there's various degrees of failure. There's the epic PR nightmare with public consumer brands. And then there's maybe smaller just mishaps that are internal that you never even knew happened, and project was killed before it ever, had the chance to see the light of day. So there's varying degrees of failure, but I do think ultimately it comes down to, the individual goals for that project, for the refresh. And usually the goal is to send some sort of a message to the market, some sort of new message. That's typically why a rebrand or refresh is considered. And so then you would say, well, was the message received? Did the market receive that message well or not? And you typically would see a revolutionary rebrand connected to a bigger message. We've been known for X, now we need to be known for Y, or we're severely getting beat by our competition, so we've got to introduce this new offering. We have to shift perceptions. That would be bigger change. That would suggest you need new color, new type, new mark, new messaging. However, if you're trying to just send a smaller message, you want to be a little bit more relevant, or you're just trying to shift the needle a little bit, that's where the evolutionary comes to play a little bit. So I think it depends on, success and failure hinges on what the message is you're trying to send, and was it received. Sometimes more on the evolutionary side of a refresh, it's more about internal adoption. It's more about like, do people really get on board with this? Do they start using new templates? Are they starting to use the new guidelines? And I think in that case, when they're just not adopting it, and feels like you're pushing a boulder uphill to get the sales team to use the right PowerPoint template, or you're wanting the digital marketing team to use the right fonts and colors in their social posts, there's something behind that of why are they not getting on board. And that often could suggest that it's not working, something's failing.
Yeah, I agree. It's quite interesting. This, like, if you look at a rebrand from the outside, it's very easy to say that this failed or was a success based on external factors. But a lot of the time, like you mentioned, it's actually an internal thing, because you need to rally your team and your people around a new, reaching a new milestone or reaching a new goal or a new direction or something. So in theory, it's hard to judge only by the looks from the outside as well. I feel like,
Yeah.
which is a good point. Okay, so looking at the process of a rebrand and kind of starting in the beginning then, Martin, at VIM, you guys do a lot of work to understand the challenges involved for your clients, right? The challenges involved in doing a rebrand, often, I guess, before deciding if a rebrand should be done or not. What kind of insights would you say a clients should have before potentially starting a project like this? What are we looking for in terms of information to kind of give the go or not?
Yeah, definitely. I think branding is. I think Blake already touched up on that. I think the branding is in the vessels of the organization, right? So it's everywhere. It's on how people behave, how people act, the materials they use every day for communications, and I think it's really important that first you get a good overview of what is there in the company. Too many times when we see in a rebrand in the beginning of the process, it's sort of an ivory tower, right? It's like this secret project that nobody is aware of, should be aware of what's happening, because for good reason. It's connected to a strategic framework that's not ready to be shared with the world yet. So it makes sense to keep it small. So the actual challenge there is that you do want to get this intel on your own organization, especially if you're in a bigger organization and you're decentralized. It's really important that you really understand who is going to work with those elements of the brand on a daily basis when it comes to science, for example, or it comes to clothing, vehicles, digital IT systems. You need to have a good overview and understanding of what it is that you're going to change, because it touches up on everything in your organization. Yeah. And in a lot of cases, like you said as well in your intro, I think people misunderstand the complexity of that. So it's really important to get that overview, to get that insight, and also to know what will it cost me in the end to do it. And we typically always say for every dollar you spend in design, you would be paid between $15 to $20 in implementation. And that's a figure people are not always aware of, that you also need to budget the actual change process itself, the implementation, not just the design.
The rollout and implementation, 15, 20 times what you spend on design is the rule of thumb that you guys have.
Yeah, that's
quite a lot.
Yeah, that's what we have in our statistics, yeah.
Okay, but so maybe for you, Blake, like, do you feel like there's a rule of thumb here where to decide, like, should we do one or should we not do one? And we've talked a little bit about this. I have quite a strong opinion on this, but from your perspective, perhaps the more creative perspective, is there a line here that, like, if we don't cross this, then we shouldn't do it?
Well, I think that a big factor in determining whether you should or shouldn't is existing equity and existing perceptions. So you need some audience research to understand first. I think sometimes people feel tired of their visual system and they just want new color because they're an in-house creative team and they're just tired of looking at the same thing over and over. But by the time you're bored and over it, the market is just now maybe being able to associate your brand with that color or with that type or with that mark. So it's really not about boredom or satisfying that and just wanting something that's more creative from an in-house perspective. You have to make sure you have an understanding of equity, and then you can decide, okay, we do have equity in this mark or this symbol or this color. However, we have this business problem that we still need to accomplish. And I think that's the difference, is you have to connect any effort like this, any investment in brand changes back to a business objective. And ultimately, if you don't, as you go through internal approval processes and socialization, and then ultimately some sort of a launch with your customers or your clients or the public, it'll just feel off, and people will scratch their head and sort of say, well, why did that happen? And I think, just to use a controversial example, when Twitter went to X, people were like, wait, I don't get it. Why did that happen? And internal people at Twitter or at X are saying, I don't understand why did it happen? And you really just saw a lack of a business objective and a lack of a need. And then the creative was confusing with not a lot of rationale, and the product didn't really change. So people are just saying, well, wait a minute. And I think that if they would have made that announcement and they made that drastic change, but the product at least changed, and you started to see a demonstration of what was different and unique, we all would have said, okay, it's a weird name, weird change, but we can get on board with it. But instead, their revenue, last I saw, the 2024 ad revenue was down 30% still. So like the negative change from Twitter to X is directly impacted. And I saw just earlier where they're doing another round of fundraising for X. And so I think you can look at that one and say, oof, I don't think that rebrand helped that business accomplish its objectives. And I think it's because the creative assets that were changed just they weren't clear of how they were helping accomplish other business objectives.
It was a change for change's sake, basically. Then
it's what it felt like, and there just wasn't a lot of communication around why the change.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, having experience from an agency myself, it feels like for me, a lot of the projects around rebranding, especially these big rebrands, should sometimes, like often, never be done, because they don't seem to be anchored in the right challenge or business perspective. I would agree. And also my experience is that sometimes it feels like people look for a rebrand as almost like a silver bullet to solve a problem, or like a core business problem that isn't really solvable by brand. It could be something completely different that has nothing to do with brand, and you look for a rebrand to kind of start fresh, but you still have all of the other parts of your business model potentially not working, and then there's really no change. But hopefully some people in the audience have been through some more successful ones and have some successful ones in their future as well. Speaking of agencies, I think this is a good segue, because when a rebranding is done, typically a company would need to choose a design partner. Some projects are done with an internal team. Most are done with an external brand design agency or partner. And Martin, you guys typically help your clients find and figure out which kind of agency to use. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Yeah.
How do you help them decide?
Yeah. It depends a lot on the client, of course, the sector they're in, and what their brand change strategy is again. So again, the strategy is important because, like you said, it's not about putting lipstick on a monkey. It's not about creating something that isn't there. But it's just something that you need to create, which is based off a strategy behind that. And understanding that strategy also is an important part for your positioning process as well. How do you want to position yourself as a brand, and what would be the type of design agency that would really fit with that ambition level and has expertise, for example, in certain domains of creating that brand and the sector that you're in. So that's also an important part that we always work in the tripartite setting with the client, and then finding that agency and working together on the actual process of conceptual design, and then going into the phases of applied design, because that's also equally important. That if you've got the concept and you've got the design down, translating that design to specific applications is also key. And there you might even need other agencies to help you in creating the best experience in that specific channel or element.
Sure. So if we can learn from you guys, then it's that if we can find a design agency with some sort of domain experience or domain knowledge or insights, that would probably help the process due to the strategic positioning that is part of the process then.
In a lot of cases, yeah, it is. Sometimes it also helps, if you want to do something radically different, that you don't go for the typical agency that has a lot of expertise in a certain domain. So it's always custom, it's always looking at the client and the DNA that the organization has, the type of brand change, and then looking at to the agencies, that we have a lot of experience with in helping them find the right fit or guiding these pitches together with the client on finding that agency.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks. So Blake, at Matchstic, when clients come to you to do a rebrand, can you share a little bit about what the experience is like?
Yeah, I can talk more about the process for sure. And I think for us, just to kind of add another layer on what is the right fit, because there are so many different types of agencies out there to help in a situation like this. We typically look for clients who want someone to guide them through the process. You know, someone that really needs an expert voice perspective to do something that is a little bit more radical in their space. They really want to use brand as an asset to stand out and to connect with their audience, not just play it safe, not just look like everyone else, not sort of, hide in the shadows. And we also want clients who are not looking for just a mouse clicker or a to-do person or a task maker. So like if you have a vision for what you want the change to be, we might not be the exact right fit for you, because we're going to help you really like capture that vision and to think through that vision and lead you to something that was maybe even better than what your expectations were. So there's different agencies out there, and we try to find groups that need that guidance, that they really want an outside expert voice to help them through that process. But in particular, the rebrand process for us does start with research and discovery, trying to understand the lay of the land, the category, the product, the service, the internal culture, everything kind of within the landscape of that organization, specifically trying to pinpoint the problem. What is the problem? Where are the equities? What's sort of untouchable? What is potentially on the table to change? And then we go through a strategic effort to help position organizations, which is the most important, in my opinion, trying to say, okay, what do you want to be known for? And once you can land the positioning around how do you want to be known in the market, then you can get into the design phase and the creative phase, where you can say, okay, based on the fact that you want to be premium, that you want to be relatable, that you want to be X, Y, and Z, now we can choose this color for this reason. We can choose this type for this reason. We can create this overall look and feel that points back to that brand positioning. And we can use language in this way that also points towards that positioning. So for us, it's a strategic exercise in the sense that you want to define how the brand should be perceived. And then let's use color as little signposts that point towards that reputation that you want to have. And then the last part of the phase for us, which it doesn't sort of happen in this sequence necessarily, in this sort of contained sequence, but then last,
it's not linear, you mean?
It's not linear, right? So like the launch part, you have to start planning at the very beginning of who needs to know, how should they find out, when should they find out, and you can build a socialization plan all the way from the beginning. But the last phase is launch, implementation, actually making the things. You want to make sure that the market sees what the vision is. So as you go through the creative process and you create beautiful keynote decks or PDFs and you're showing the client loves it, you want to make sure that that's the same thing that the market actually sees, because there's a lot that happens in between that, vision casting and the design process, and then the actual website, the actual social campaign, or the actual digital ads. A lot happens in between that can get you sideways and can cause failure as well. So we want to kind of usher through a plan that gets people all the way to a successful launch like that.
I guess that we typically also see designers create this kind of like brand reel or brand video to launch new brands now, right? And I assume this is also due to the fact that you kind of a single static format isn't enough anymore to kind of portray this whole project. So you want something that is a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more in depth, I guess, to get this story out. But we want to follow up on something you said, like in terms of like having a clear ICP or kind of a clear type of project that you want to do as a design studio. So I assume that this means that you also turn down certain projects, right? And you typically, the way I understand this is that you want projects that allows you to use your expertise as a creative and a strategist. Is this an internal thing in an agency as well? I know designers typically want to do cool shit, right? So it's not like people want to be stuck working on a lot of projects that they don't believe in. Is this a strategy for you guys?
I think it's a real challenge for agencies to navigate that, because as creatives, we do feel like our work is a reflection of our identity and who we are. Yep. And so our personal beliefs quickly get layered into that. But as an agency, we have 27 people. So that's a set of 27 individual preferences, likes, dislikes, beliefs. And we want to be very diverse in our belief systems as well. So we don't want to be, have a singular belief that then filters in what we can or can't take. So it is a little bit of a challenge for sure. But what we do is we have things where self-selection happens also. So, what it takes to do a project the right way takes a significant amount of investment. So if you want someone that you're just going to give the tasks to go and do and create, it would be a waste of money to hire an agency like Matchstic. So there is a part where clients will realize that, and they can go get a freelancer to do it much, much cheaper. And then also kind of like a small tactic, when we get RFPs or requests for proposal on a new opportunity, if the client isn't willing to hop on a call to talk through the RFP, that's usually a sign that we won't enter or respond to it, because if they can't give us a little information and invest a little bit in a human to human connection, they're probably not going to be a great fit for us anyway. And our likelihood of winning is very, very low, because they're probably sending it out to 40 agencies. They probably already have an agency in mind. They're just having to go through the process, So if they won't get on the phone to talk with us, then it's a sign that we just shouldn't enter the proposal.
That's a very good point. A good advice for other design agencies as well, I would assume. Would you agree here, Martin, in terms of this process of choosing? Have you seen anything similar to this?
Well, I think Blake said it's really important is the DNA fit, right? With the people, the process, how do you work together? And I think if that chemistry is right, because it is about chemistry when you create this brand, as I said, we're more from the business side of things, but you cannot put everything in the requirements list of, what you want in terms of design. There's so much also human emotion tied to that. And I think that yes, there's a strategic framework and it should fit, but you should also have that chemistry with, the people leading that from the client side as well, with the agency. And sometimes you can't really put that in a box, right? It's something that you need to experience, and the human connection there is really important. That's where we see it go wrong as well. Is if you want to treat design as a commodity that you can sort of negotiate on, right, and get the cheapest price out of that, then it's the same like if you want to build a house, you take an architect, but you don't really want to pay the architect for a great design. If you want to get the house as cheap as possible, then you might end up with a prefab house, right? So I think that's a bit of the same. If you really want to take out a lot of the costs, then you do get a lot of compromises on the design, which aren't great in the long run. So it's in my opinion, it's the wrong thing to be saving money on, because it's really important that you get it right the first time around. You don't get a second chance to do it.
That's a very good point. And also, chemistry is important in a creative process in general. Doesn't matter what it is, right? You have to work quite closely with someone and spar and throw ideas off each other. So it makes a lot of sense that this needs to be someone you want to be in the room with at the end of the day. What about internal teams doing rebrandings? Have you seen this, Martin? And does it have any impact on success or failure when a company doesn't choose an external agency?
To be honest, I've never experienced a rebranding that's been done completely internal from a design standpoint. There's always been, in my experience, there's always been an external conceptual designer there at least, so that at least they might have their internal design department, but then they would still, have a design agency for the more strategic conceptual design, and then maybe hand that over in an early stage and then do the application themselves. But I've never experienced a full in-house rebranding in that sense.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in terms of measuring success as well. There have been a couple situations and a couple stories around brands stating that rebranding was done in-house, and then it turns out there was an agency involved in the early phases, and then that comes out afterwards, which isn't a good way to kind of roll out a PR campaign at all. But what about you, Blake? What's the difference between working on a rebrand like 100% yourself versus with an internal team?
Well, I do think there's some advantages for doing it internal. And I've mostly learned about this through the podcast. So when I interview someone who's led change internally, there's definitely a sense of, you already know the business, you already know the culture, you know what may or may not work. So there's no alignment or onboarding of an agency. So there's a little bit of a speed effect. And then you can also pivot pretty quickly, I think. So one story quickly from the podcast, a technology company, Zapier, went through a rebrand, and they had worked for months and months and months on a new logo, new visual identity system. And the week they go to launch, a new Z word mark, so the new symbol was going to be a Z, was the week that the story broke of the Russian tanks invading Ukraine were spray painted with white Z's. The same week. And so, it's like the creative director has been working on this for 8 months, lots of money sunk into it, but the leadership decided we can't launch this. We have to pause it. So then they had 3 or 4 weeks to sort of figure something else out, and they were able to do that, and they were able to launch and, kind of salvaged it at the last minute, where an agency would have said, we can't do that in 3 weeks. I'm so sorry. It probably would not have worked from a speed perspective. However, I will say there's an old saying, that a prophet isn't welcome in his own town. So oftentimes internal leaders are brilliant on the creative side, on the brand side. However, because they're so close to executive leadership within the company, they maybe don't have the same sort of presence or expertise from a perception standpoint. Whereas an agency comes as an outsider and they represent this unique expertise and can often influence with the same exact message. They get influence executive leadership in a new or different way because of that. So you do bring an outside perspective, and you do sometimes bring a little bit more of the aura of expertise that can help push something over a hump in terms of getting approved.
That's a good point. And I guess that goes for you guys as well, Martin, in VIM Group, right? Coming from the outside with the expertise that you have, I would assume people are listening when you talk. Well, I know they do, actually. We've had you here as well.
Well, in most cases, you hope that they're listening. Yeah, I think it comes down to the fact that we do this on a daily basis, right? So we go through rebrands on a daily basis with the specific expertise that we have. So yeah, in most cases, clients do value our opinion. Sometimes, for our liking, we get brought in a little bit too late, so then there's already a rebranding going on, or even in the later phases when the issues arise, and we help them solve them as best as possible. But yeah, ideally, if the earlier we get in, the more we can actually save you money during the implementation phase, or having to fix things later on, of course. So.
But speaking of that, like implementation and I guess rollout, the later stages, because you guys also help companies and your clients choose the type of technology, the type of I guess implementation processes, the type of rollout tools that they should use for this type of project. Can you tell us a little bit about this, like this phase of the project, and kind of why is or if this is important to the success or failure?
Yeah, of course. Now, I think typically when you run a rebranding and you need to sort of calculate the budget that you need to do for design and rollout, this is CapEx budget, right? So it's budget that you would actually get from the board as a project budget to run the entire rebranding. And it makes sense when you are doing that to also look at the operational side of things, how we can actually also save money from the OpEx side, so from the operational expenses. So what are people actually spending on the creation of daily material, for example? And whilst we are doing that, the impact analysis, which is one of the first pieces that we would do during the rebrand, is actually not only look at what's there, but also what are the working processes? How do people create material? How is marketing being distributed? Where does the design come from? Who's handling this or that? And in a lot of cases, we're also able to identify that technology can save a huge amount of costs in the operational part of it. And then you can actually stick an ROI to the rebranding. So the rebranding, we were talking about the cost of design and of implementation, but you can actually earn that money back in a lot of cases if you use the momentum that you go through in a rebranding, touching up on all of these different touch points, creating new content, creating new design. It's also the ideal stage to reorganize your tech stack. If you're already, thinking about changing these elements, it's more than the perfect time to do it because you're putting new content in there anyway. And during the rebrand, you can also educate people not only on the brand, but also on how they can execute faster with more efficiency and more effectivity in going to market with the new brands.
Yeah, it's the same thing that we see here. It's the perfect time to kind of question everything in a sense. From your point of view, Blake, what are the typical challenges or points of friction when a brand is actually rolling out? Do you have any horror stories you want to share?
Well, one project front, this is probably 10 years old, so I think it's okay to share. I won't say the name, but what can happen, this was a trucking and logistics company that was international, and they wanted to go through a rebranding process, engaged with us, a long audience research scope, a long strategic effort, and then we got into the creative elements, and we really felt like there was equity in their current marks. However, as we presented initial ideas in a big boardroom with, executives that have never done this before, never gone through a rebrand, but are paid to have a strong opinion, their strong reaction and opinion was, well, if we're going to go through this, shouldn't we really change? Like, we shouldn't do a refresh. We should do a massive rebrand. And they sort of pushed for us to suggest more revolutionary change. But what they failed to calculate in that moment was something that Martin said earlier, the cost of implementation. And you think about the cost for hundreds of trucks, across the globe, thousands of trucks, and they wanted to significantly change color. So I think about revolutionary change in terms of shape, color, content. So, if your logo shape changes, that's pretty significant. If your logo color, your brand color changes, that's pretty significant. Content like type, imagery, layout, that's maybe a little less significant. But in this case, they were changing core signature brand color, which meant every new truck going forward would have to be orange and no longer blue and yellow kind of a thing. So they failed to calculate the cost. And by the time we got through all the approvals, they started to think about implementation. It went away because of the millions of dollars it was going to cost to actually implement. And the whole project sort of died from a visual perspective. The strategic element rolled out, messaging rolled out, but the creative design part never quite saw the light of day because of that.
We see this as especially when there's physical products or physical like objects that has to be changed, right? Obviously, the implementation is even costlier. This is from a BrandPad perspective. This has been kind of an interesting selling point for us, because like having a digital guideline that is always updated has been the point of. Like, you can never actually do those changes in the wrong way, because we have stories where people have foliated cars, 50, 100 cars with the wrong color because they had the wrong version of a BAM portal, right? So it's a very interesting problem to have, or a stupid problem to have, I guess. We are running. Go ahead.
Well, one quick thing, just in the manufacturing space, you do see that quite a bit, where a marketing team wants to push for change, maybe logo change, but then on the product side, maybe the mechanicals or the dies that are needed to change the actual product are so expensive that there's a disconnect between the product manufacturing and the marketing team itself. And that is where you have to just have alignment on the goals. You have to have across all departments sort of synced up on what the change might mean, and making sure that they're open to change before you really start the project.
Good point. We are running out of time soon. I have a couple more questions that I was hoping we could get to, and I think we have something from the audience here as well. First, maybe an important one to in case people here are planning on a rebrand in the future. Are there any warning signs that kind of this project is heading in the wrong direction? Are there any flags one should be on the lookout for when it comes to being involved in our rebranding process? Any ideas here?
Yeah, I think we touched up on a few of them. I think Blake always said, one of the things is, are you serious about brand design, right? Is it something that you just want to get deep and fix a problem, or is it something that you really want to handle strategically? So I think that this is one of the first things that we see a lot. And again, really making sure, we always say that the actual pain of doing a rebrand is in the beginning, because as a client, you really need to do your homework. You really need to understand, if we are going to go ahead with the strategy, and we do need a rebrand, do we have everything in place? Do we know enough about our organization? And even if you have to do it under wraps, then still make sure that you can involve key players in the organization, because it's so important to have that. If that's not there, that's one of the first things that we assess, is that we need to have access to certain people or certain information. Otherwise, we can't really help you paint a good picture of what a rebranding looks like in terms of costs or in rollout scenario, for example.
That's a very good point. You need access to the right people, and basically you need internal, people to pull in your direction, basically the right people for this to be rolled out successfully. So you need insights then, and you need enough time, enough insights, enough money, and enough people internally to be involved. And then potentially this could be a success, I guess. Yeah. We have a question from the audience here. Should we do that, or do you have anything to add to that, Blake?
Well, one thing to add quickly is just timeline. I think when we have clients or prospects that come in that want to move in an unreasonable amount of time, you kind of get a sense that there may be shrinking what's going to be required, or maybe they have a limited view of the value of what this is. And so oftentimes I think the timeline is a big indicator. If you're wanting to launch significant change within a few weeks, that's just not enough time to really make it right. And you should be concerned with longevity, that your brand assets are going to add value over time, not short-term fixes. And so I think there's a correlation to timing with all of this as well.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if I may, I think that's a really important part that we haven't really discussed yet. Is also the scenarios for change for the rollout, right? In the past, we saw a lot of big bang scenarios, so where we even in weekends we changed the letterheads and the printers, at companies, just to make sure that if they came in on a Monday, everything was changed. And nowadays it's much more of a phased approach, where we phase out certain material, so you can deplete your stock that you have in certain things. But there's always a really delicate balance in what the brand value is to your customers and your stakeholders. If you do a rebrand, you can't be too lazy with phasing out material. You need to pull some of the stuff forward and say, okay, this is at least the most valuable or most visible items that we need to rebrand and have priority over others. And I think that planning is also it's something that you have to do very meticulously, and look at what we have in terms of material and which phases are we going to execute the rebrand.
That's a super interesting point, Martin. Sort of like not necessarily a soft launch, but a part launch, and you change out things as you go. Then instead of doing like one big, Monday morning, here's the reveal, which should minimize risk as well, I assume, right?
Yeah, you can map these out in what we call as a visibility matrix, so that you actually, on the one hand side, you've got the items listed in terms of how visible they are and how important they are to your audience, and on the other hand, how complex they are to change, right? So because some things are easy to change, like a lot of this digital appearances, you can change the skinning off. But in a lot of cases, if you go really deep into IT systems, then sometimes it's really difficult to change that in a very short amount of time. You need to have the right IT people on that project as well. And that helps you decide against what are our priorities and what do we want to do in what timelines. And like Blake said, that also helps you jump the gun too early, right? Because if you run into a problem and you think, oh, that's an easy fix, and then it turns out the IT department really needs 2 months to do that and get all the legal work sorted before you can actually go ahead with that change, then you really have a problem in rollout.
Agreed. A question from the audience here. I can press this, I think, from Carsten from Germany. What do you think of the Jaguar rebrand and how it is rolling out? Does anybody want to jump on this?
Well, I can quickly say that I think the negative PR that happened at first was exactly what they wanted to happen. And there was a reason why it was so ambiguous and sort of weird. I do feel like they made a mistake not keeping the previous Jaguar cat symbol. I think they could have rolled out a version of the rebrand that had just the word mark that they did, and the word mark and the cat. And it would have felt like, okay, they still have the cat for legacy reasons or purposes, but then these new models, this is how it's going to work. So they could have at least had a little more flexibility in there. And I think part of the mystery at first was similar to the X Twitter thing. Is like, what's happening? Why are they doing that? Why all of these plastic looking models and the futuristic, post-apocalyptic world, art direction? And it just sort of didn't make sense. But if they would have done all of that with the new concept car and the new vehicle in some of the materials, I think it would have been like, okay, they're just trying to show us that it's a very different type of a vehicle. They're trying to shift our perceptions of the Jaguar brand. And I think that would have been a little bit better. I think what we have heard since then around a lot of internal dilemma around this has been interesting. And I would love to learn more of like what actually happened inside the organization, because I have seen where some of the in-house team have said they did not endorse it. They did not like it. One of the leaders around design was adamant in some sort of a communication out to the public about the change. So I do think there was a lot of alignment challenges, and it'll be interesting to see how it affects the business. I think ultimately that's that's the metric of what it should be of success or failure. How well does this brand change help their business?
I agree. And also we are not sure exactly what the reason is, like you mentioned, right? There could be, like, it does feel a little bit like a small change of target audience, maybe, that they want to move from a certain target audience and a certain perception into a more of a, I don't know, broader position. But at least I'm not aware of the strategic background. I think we have to wrap up, being mindful of time here. 45, 46, actually 47 minutes in. I think that's it. Is there any more questions from the audience? Rick says, like Kia, which is also an interesting rebrand with a lot of different negative feedback, I guess, with the new logo mark. I think that's it for now, and we are wrapping up. I want to thank everyone who, I guess, dialed in to watch and hear, and also obviously thanks to Martin and Blake for the expertise and the war stories and all of the insights that you brought. If you'd like to talk to any of us, you can reach Martin. We can find you at VIM-group.com, I think.
Yeah,
that's correct. And Blake, you're at Matchstic without the K.com.
That's right.
And your podcast can be found on wherever you listen to podcasts, I guess.
Yep.
I'm Espen. You can reach me at espen@brandpad.io if there's anything. I guess until we see each other again, thank you and goodbye.